Salams from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani and you're watching Daily Debrief, where we take you beyond the headlines on some of the most important news stories of the day from around the world. Today we're talking about parties in 10 Downing Street, or the latest updates on details emerging from there, and finally an appeal from Olympic and Paralympic champions asking for equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. First up, Boris Johnson's grip on the UK's prime ministership is being openly questioned on the front pages of British newspapers, while both Conservative and opposition MPs are demanding answers from Boris Johnson over whether he attended a drinks event in the number 10 Downing Street garden during lockdown. Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, said that if he was there and he lied about it, his position as prime minister is untenable. Johnson will appear at Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday, his first public appearance since details of the May 2020 event emerged. People's Dispatch's Prashant joins us now. Prashant, to me, this displays just complete and utter contempt for victims of the pandemic.
Right, Siddhant. So, a couple of things, of course. One, it's important to note that this party in number 10 Downing Street in May 2020 took place amid some of the harshest restrictions that have been imposed in the United Kingdom. So, if you look at, for instance, the kind of restrictions that were there at that point of time, I mean, the police were being extremely, very, very harsh on people, for instance, who were outside. There were apparently even prosecutions, or they were apparently action taken against people who organize parties inside their own homes without without anyone from outside coming in, or for the fact that any kind of protest around that time was cracked down on. It's always interesting to note that somehow the rich and the powerful seem to be able to gather and party, while it's always the protests who are cracked down across the world in the name of COVID-19 restrictions. And I think the numbers basically say that 14,244 fines for breaches of lockdown laws were issued between 27th March and 11th May 2020. And, if you look at the kind of restrictions that were there, there were people even in the same households who sometimes prohibited intermingling. Schools, of course, shut down. People's students' education were affected. Restaurants, nightclubs, any kind of public space, theaters, all of these were shut down. And then you have the site of the most powerful residence in the country. That's number 10 Downing Street, where a party which is attended by at least 40 staff members who, of course, brought alcohol, brought food, and generally partied. So this, of course, is this specific event, and Boris Johnson once again being very cagey about giving a direct statement. In fact, by the time this show goes on air, a lot may have changed. So, but of course, it's also important to note that this is not the only party we're talking about. There are at least two more parties in the same year, which were also the subject of they're subject of an inquiry by Sue Gray, and there's a full-fledged inquiry going on. In fact, one of Boris Johnson's spokespersons had to resign recently because she was caught joking about denying this party. So overall, I think what these parties and news about these parties have indicated is a larger sense of contempt, and it's only rightfully so that the UK media has consistently been bringing out stories of people whose lives were destroyed that time. People whose loved ones died, people who could not even go to visit their loved ones because of the restrictions. And then you have this site of the prime minister, prime minister, top leaders, top people partying around that time. So I think it speaks to the larger sense of complete disenchantment and disgust with the political establishment that has steered the United Kingdom through the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right, and you also rightly mentioned, Prashant, the kind of crackdowns on protests of all kinds. The UK tried to push through also a new police bill, a very wide-ranging police bill. In that context, just to widen the conversation a little bit, how do you view the handling of this Boris Johnson government of the pandemic?
Right, Siddhant. So, I think we also need to, of course, look at the fact that these parties are maybe perhaps just a symptom, and the larger crisis is, of course, a crisis of governance, a crisis of the system itself, and that plays out in innumerable ways in the United Kingdom today. So, over the last month, we saw the United Kingdom especially facing massive shortages in the national health system. And I think the numbers there were about 30,000 NHS staff who were on leave in the first week of January due to COVID-related reasons, who were absent because many of them were affected, many of them were hit in various ways. And at the numbers exactly 35,500 actually daily absences in the week up to January 2nd. And this is important to note at a time when there are 93,000 NHS vacancies. Just imagine that number. That's 93,000 vacancies in the National Health Service. And why is that so? It is so because the government, both the Labour, of course, government, but also the Conservative government, especially over time, has focused so much on trying to privatize the National Health Service. And it's ironic
Absolutely.
because a bill specifically, which according to unions will increase the privatization, is currently being discussed. So
Mm.
imagine that the fact that at a time when, and this bill was, of course, introduced last year. So at a time when the National Health Service was the backbone of how the United Kingdom handled the COVID-19 pandemic, a bill is being discussed in Parliament, which will further, say, lead to greater privatization of the NHS, which will give private players more of an entry point. I think the idea is to break down. There'll be various circles within the NHS. I think around 42 circles or something for in 42 separate integrated care systems. It's called, and these will all have their own budget. So unions across the United Kingdom, for instance, have consistently opposed this, and I think numbers say that the level of privatization of the NHS in 2018 to 19 was around 9.2 billion pounds. That's around 7 to 22%. So there's been a
Mm.
consistent attempt to dilute the NHS. In fact, even recently we've had information that because of the because of the pressure on the NHS, private hospitals are being paid to do a lot of these surgeries and procedures, and
Right.
this again has been opposed by a lot of opposed in the sense a lot of commentators, a lot of unions, doctors for that matter have asked the question that why hasn't this money rather been poured into the NHS itself? Why is the NHS
Yeah.
being weakened? And this is,
Yeah.
of course, one aspect of it. There is a large social crisis also. If you look, for instance, at the economic figures, they talk about a very, very difficult time for the British people. In fact,
Mm.
for instance, there are, I think, numbers which show that in terms of real wages, people are, getting paid even less than before 2008 during the time of the financial crisis. The kind of pay hikes that have been implemented over the years have been paltry. So there is a larger, crisis of survival itself in the United Kingdom. So the Boris Johnson government has been, patting itself on the back. Of course, we must remember that its first instinct was to argue for the widely discredited herd immunity idea, the thing that
Mm.
let cases happen, and or before they were forced to change stance in the face of evidence. But now
Mm.
they've been sort of patting themselves on the back, saying they have a great vaccine rollout act, etc., etc. But the important thing to note is that amidst all this, there has been a consistent effort to destroy the public infrastructure that one was essential to combat the NHS, and there has been hardly any effort, no effort, in
Mm.
fact, to say ensure that people get the kind of support they need during the time of the pandemic. Of course,
Mm.
this is not just a case in the United Kingdom. Many developed economies around the world initially
Yeah.
provided some kind of support, but then started withdrawing the support as soon as uh, even the slightest this as soon as the signs of breakthrough appeared in the pandemic. So yeah.
Mm. Right. And finally, in a video, very timely and very important video produced and released by the International Olympic Committee, athletes are calling on world leaders and decision makers to ensure free and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. The call comes a few weeks before the start of the Olympic Winter Games in Beijing. Those games will, of course, take place from Feb 4 to Feb 20th. Athletes who participated in the call to action include several Olympic and Paralympic medalists and champions and members of the IOC's Athletes Commission. Leslie joins us now. Leslie is NewsClick Sports editor. Leslie, you've seen the video, and you've, of course, we've talked extensively over the role that athletes have to play in pushing out messages of why vaccination and equitable vaccination is so important. What do you make of this latest call, given what's been happening over the past few days with footballers and with Djokovic and all of that?
Yeah, so it's actually very timely that way, because with the third wave eating across the world, the biggest concern in the scientific community right now is that with vaccinations not reaching the a substantial chunk of population, a percentage of population in the world, there is always this likelihood that waves will keep returning and returning. It's not about certain section of the population getting a third jab or a booster jab. It's about everyone getting that vaccine, so that there is a equal chance for the population to fight off many variants that come in. So in that regard, it's very timely that these athletes across the world have come together to push that message that it is, again, the key is free and equitable vaccination, right? So that's not what is happening right now. It's a big business out there, and they have been making money within the pandemic even when the pandemic is raging and it's disrupting all economic activities elsewhere. So what this does is that if you look at the reach of these athletes, you are talking about Olympic medalists also. We from India, we have PV Sindhu in that video as well, double Olympic medalist, and they obviously have a reach in their countries, within their societies, and via that in their governments. So the pressure naturally builds on the governments, on the respective governments of the countries to at least think about it. I'm not saying that they would overnight make a decision, and uh, of course there are many economic constraints, business constraints, political constraints, availability constraints. All these factors are there, but at least a thought would be in place. Something has put into the works. They will think of how best to implement or changes. Hopefully, they will think of all those things. And at the same time, it's actually a mass mobilization. If you look at it, the number of athletes who have come out with this message and their reach globally, it is possibly the biggest pressure that pharma companies will face in this regard. How best to provide uh, vaccines to the masses without actually being too worried about making money out of it, because that's a social responsibility that these companies have. And I believe uh, with the sports persons and the kind of reach that they have, we know these actually the endorsement power of sports persons, right? So with that, there would be an added pressure on pharma companies also to rethink their strategies as far as how as far as business is concerned within COVID-19 and its vaccination systems that are in place. And the last,
and also I think to acknowledge that a large amounts of the money that has gone into the research and development of these vaccines is actually public money.
It is. So it's only fair that the
public sees
benefits of that
benefit.
research goes back into the public as well.
Yeah.
This has been debated even in Newspeak channel. We have had these kind of debates a lot, but it just seems to be ignored that this is a logical thing that the companies were expected to do, but that's not happening. We know ourselves how much of it is business taking precedence over the larger good of humankind. And the last bit about at least coming out, I would like to also point out that it's timely in the sense that someone like Djokovic, who is anti-vaccine, is it's a raging issue now. What happened in Australia, where he was denied visa, then he was granted visa, and all these things happening. And so also in Europe and many other countries, footballers are skeptical about taking vaccines, and footballers and their reach as far as swaying opinions is huge. So in that regard also, with all these Olympic heroes coming in and conveying the message, it will have an impact on anti-vaccine movement as well, and people would readily hopefully people would have a thought in their mind as well whether it is right or wrong to take that vaccine, and whether they should reconsider their personal biases and think about it in scientific terms and understand the larger good that is out there and go for it. So these are this is a corollary to this to the message that has come out. And at the same time, IOC has that the power also to get some of these stakeholders. I'm specifically talking about companies to also join the bandwagon and maybe fund some of these projects.
Respond. Absolutely.
Because IOC has a host of sponsors for their Olympic movement program. So that can also happen. So it's actually a landmark historic move in the history of fight against COVID-19 virus. So coronavirus. So
right. Hopefully, and hopefully this call to action is also backed up with pressure in boardrooms and other places where it really, at the end of the day, has some impact. Thanks very much for that, Leslie. That is all we have on the show for today. For more on this and other stories, you can visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and please do give us a follow on all the regular social media platforms for updates. We leave you today with that video, that call to action from some of the most celebrated Olympic and Paralympic athletes from around the world. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.
Dear leaders of the world,
Dear decision makers,
as athletes,
we can bring the world together
through the power of sport.
now more than ever,
we stand united
To use that power of sport
and the Olympic and Paralympic movement
to help win the battle against COVID.
because we go faster.
We aim higher.
we are stronger.
Then we stand together.
We have been given a way forward.
With a safe and effective vaccine
That can help save precious lives and protect our friends
And our families.
So we call on government to join hands in giving free and equal access
to the vaccine for everybody across the world.
To pledge our collective responsibility
to protect those who are the most vulnerable.
because everyone on this planet
has a right to live
A healthy life.
We are stronger together when we stand in solidarity and care for each other. We are stronger together.
Dear leaders of the world,
dear decision makers,
As athletes,
we can bring the world together
through the power of sport.
now more than ever,
we stand united
To use that power of sport
and the Olympic and Paralympic movement
To help win the battle against COVID.
because we go faster.
we aim higher.
we are stronger.
Then we stand together.
We have been given a way forward.
With a safe and effective vaccine
That can help save precious lives and protect our friends
And our families.
So we call on government to join hands in giving free and equal access
to the vaccine for everybody across the world.
to pledge our collective responsibility
to protect those who are the most vulnerable.
because everyone on this planet
has a right to live
A healthy life.
We are stronger together when we stand in solidarity and care for each other. We are stronger together.